Welcome to Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. My name is Calla Jayne, and today on Your Longevity Blueprint podcast, we are flipping the script. I get to interview the brain power, the founder, creator, and owner of Your Longevity Blueprint, and author of Your Longevity Blueprint, and owner of Integrative Health and Hormone Clinic in Hiawatha, Iowa, among many things. Dr. Stephanie Gray is a functional medicine provider who helps men and women build sustainable and optimal health and longevity so that they can focus on what matters most to them. She helps women in midlife who feel like their bodies have betrayed them step back into their bodies by restoring optimal hormone levels so that they can regain their sleep, figure, mood, and feel amazing once again. She is known for keeping hormone replacement therapy sexy, safe, and effective. She has been working as a nurse practitioner since 2009. She completed her doctorate focusing on estrogen metabolism from the University of Iowa in 2011. Additionally, she has a master's in metabolic nutritional medicine from the University of South Florida's Medical School. Her expertise lies within integrative anti-aging and functional medicine. She is arguably one of the Midwest's most credentialed female health providers, combining many certifications and trainings. She completed the Advanced Fellowship in Anti-Aging, Regenerative, and Functional Medicine in 2013. She became the first BioT certified provider in Iowa to administer hormone pellets also in 2013. She is one of Dr. Nirala Jacoby's SIBO doctor approved practitioners. She is also one of Dr. Jill Krista's certified mold literate providers. She has appeared on numerous podcasts, summits, and TV interviews. She is a contributor to various health publications, including Mind Body Green. She is the initial author of the FNP Mastery app and on Amazon's best-selling author of Your Longevity Blueprint. She is the host of Your Longevity Blueprint podcast and co-founder of Your Longevity Blueprint Nutraceuticals with her husband, Eric. They enjoy spending time outdoors with their son, William, and they have founded Integrative Health and Hormone Clinic in Hiawatha, Iowa. Welcome to the show, Dr. Gray.
This is weird, I have to admit. We'll have some fun here, but isn't it interesting and kind of difficult reading someone else's bio? Like, I've done it a million times, and it's sometimes like a tongue twister, and you're like, but yeah, thank you for that wonderful bio, CJ.
Well, tongue twister, but also I still feel like it really doesn't truly accurately sum up all of the things that you have done and invested. I've always joked with you that the only reason why your book is a bestseller is because I wrote the foreword.
As you should, yeah.
and I say that lovingly though too, because even in that foreword, it was so hard to articulate truly all that you've done. And I feel like this is really, it's seemingly when you first read it, you're like, wow, it's really impressive. But from my own personal experience of what I observe in you, it's still really lackluster in truly what you have invested in for your patients and your knowledge. And so it's so great to be friends with you. And I'm glad that you agreed to let me interview you so that I can help my patients and your providers and your followers to listen to really understand more of you on a deeper level and connect with you by answering some of these questions we have outlined for today.
Well, yeah, it was a good idea. I told you I'm a little bit nervous here. I don't know what all I'm going to share, but let's have at it. We'll get rolling.
Yeah. So can you kind of walk us through what led you to where you're at today, being a healthcare provider?
Yeah, I think, and I share this in my book too, I was really fortunate to be raised, my family, but raised in a family that always just appreciated a more natural approach to health. My parents always took us to the chiropractor. We always had home cooked meals. We were engaged in physical activity. I had a healthy upbringing, and I know not everybody had that. Like, our parents weren't feeding us mac and cheese all the time. Like, the neighborhood kids always had that. My mom on Easter Sunday actually joked, one of the neighborhood boys who we saw Sunday at church, she said, I would always have to fix our meal, and then he'd come over and I'd have to fix a mac and cheese because that's all he would eat. And it's kind of funny to joke back on that, but like, literally I was raised in a really healthy family. And so I think my appreciation for, I guess, staying healthy started young because my parents were self-employed. They had a super high deductible. Okay, this is like 30, 40 years ago, right? Now a lot of people have high deductibles, but back then you worked at Rockwell, you didn't pay anything like to go to the doctor. And so because we had such a high deductible, my parents were always taking us to the chiropractor. That was probably my first real introduction to thinking differently. And that when I was having menstrual cramps, rather than be put on birth control, she put me on some progesterone boosting herbs. I mean, I think she was really ahead of her time back then. We were put on omega-3 fatty acids. We didn't even have sugar in our home. As I also mentioned in my book, my lemonade stand failed because I didn't know that we're supposed to put sugar in lemonade, because we literally didn't really have it in the home. And so I think I don't know, I was just raised in a family that more appreciated this. And then I guess flash forward, I did go to nursing school. I almost went to chiropractic school,
Yeah.
but clearly some of my good friends are chiropractors, but I ended up in nursing school with the end goal of having prescriptive privileges. I think that's what really made up my mind. Is I thought, if I become a chiropractor, I'm not going to be able to prescribe. Not that I want to prescribe a lot, but I knew if I became a nurse practitioner, I would be able to prescribe.
Yeah.
And so I went straight through, got those prescriptive, privileges. And the nurse practitioner, Jennifer Swearingen, who's still in practice here in Iowa today, she had her own private practice. And my intent was to shadow her that last semester, because I thought, she's in private practice doing this. Again, I was raised in an entrepreneurial family. And I thought, I want to be in private practice. I want to kind of do things my way and not have to essentially just manage medications all day. That's not why I went to nurse practitioner school. So I shadowed her with the intent of learning how to kind of run my own practice. And it just so happened that she was learning functional medicine. And so the orthomolecular reps, who as well, came in and were really just advising her on, just biochemistry and like how supplements work. And they recommended this liver detox program. And I kind of thought, I had nothing to lose. I'll do this liver detox. And just even thinking back, even hearing you read my bio, like that 10 years ago, you and I both, were finishing A4M's program. That was a decade ago. That just sounds so long ago, but even longer than that ago, as I had shadowed Jennifer, I was introduced to orthomolecular. And I think that was a huge next introduction to functional medicine, because I thought, oh gosh, I got to stay in contact with this company. And they really did help me. I'm sure they've helped you too, just learn application of supplements and, appropriate labs. And so they were a really good introduction. And then so be it, one of my first patients out of grad school gave me a flyer for American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And I think there was like a Suzanne Summers advertisement or something in there. And I said, I'm going to this. I don't know what this is, but it sounds like this is what I should be learning. And it was, and the rest is history. I went to the hormone conferences, and then I signed up for the fellowship and just flew through it. And at that time, no one else had completed the advanced fellowship in Iowa, only, which we both know, the late Marilyn Hines had, right? She was OB-GYN. And so I think I don't know, I guess just when did I hear about functional medicine was the question. So I think my family kind of raised me with that mindset, wanting to get to the root cause of the problem. And the providers that I fortunately saw, also had that mindset. And then I was able to shadow Jennifer Swearingen and, meet the ortho reps. And then I went to A4M, and everything just kind of fell in place. That's the short end of that, I guess. But hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and just to kind of piggyback off that, functional medicine, and just like with your, all the nursing school that you had to do, learning the cellular energy, how we gain energy from a cellular level from the fats and carbs and proteins we eat in the Krebs cycle, and just how functional medicine really then like fills the gaps of functionally, here's what goes wrong if we're lacking these basic nutrients. And so functional medicine really brings that like whole cellular, biochemical, physiological response internally, and allows you to apply it with each individual patient.
Totally.
So you started foundationally, and you had talked about too, even just the reason why you pursued the nursing is so that you could have the prescriptive rights. But what I witnessed you, Stephanie, with some of your patients, to have the prescriptive right to be able to prescribe also allows you to pull patients off medications that they don't need, or that are potentially causing them more side effects or creating other disease as a result. So I think too, not only just to prescribe, but to legally and safely pull patients off medications that are not serving them well.
Yeah, I think there's a huge overprescription of statin medications to manage blood sugar, the proton pump inhibitors, the SSRIs, I mean, you name it, birth control pills. Patients come here many times, and one of their first goals is get me off drugs. I say, that's great, but we got to like rebuild your body first. Once you're feeling better, right? Once labs are looking better, then we can slowly start to wean off those medications. But yeah, that's a strength in what we do here. And I love that. And patients appreciate that they can finally, rather than just be, put on medication for 3 decades, someone's finally analyzing their med list and helping them achieve those goals.
Well, and finding the holes that the reason why they might have, let's say, high blood pressure, high cholesterol is because they're lacking that foundation. Also, you build them up foundationally and you're like, you don't even need a med whatsoever because we've
Right.
gotten you so healthy as a result of that process.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Very cool. So, hey, a huge part of your research has been in breast cancer. Can you tell me, one, why were you drawn to breast cancer to research it in the first place, but what you have found out and how you've built upon that knowledge over the years?
It's really hard to remember when I look back at like what my doctoral project was, because again, it was so long ago. But what must have happened is I must have already attended an A4M conference when I was in grad school. So maybe I misspoke earlier, because I don't know how else I would have even known about estrogen metabolism, but that really fascinated me, I think, because I had endometriosis, painful periods, whatnot. And I had to pick a project. And, many of well, this does make sense because I was in practice. Sorry, it's so long ago. I was practicing as a nurse practitioner while I was getting my doctorate. So it was upon graduation that I heard about my, nurse practitioner graduation. I heard about A4M, and then I was going on, for my doctorate while I was practicing, but still in school. And I think I was just really interested in learning about estrogen metabolism because breast cancer is so prevalent, right? 1 in 8, it might even be 1 in 6 women, I don't know, but it's the leading cause of cancer death for women. And I knew that many healthcare providers didn't really know of any sort of new approaches to breast cancer prevention. Or a lot of patients are just put on estrogen blocking drugs. Many of these patients are not advised on diet at all. And I just knew that there had to be more, I guess. And so I kind of took it upon myself with my doctoral project. I thought this is going to be an opportunity, for me to learn more, just because I knew I was going to be prescribing hormones in practice and I wanted to assure the safety of their use. But also it would be helpful for me as far as trying to get to the root cause of my endometriosis. I knew there was a link with this poor estrogen metabolism. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for my classmates and for my, educators, when most of them were doing projects on like community vaccinations or, some sort of, clinical, I don't know, guideline update. And here I am talking about estrogen metabolism and breast cancer, improving estrogen metabolism for breast cancer prevention. And it was a different topic for sure. And I definitely got quizzed as you're, presenting here. I don't even know, as you're defending your project, I definitely got, quizzed and I did well and I passed and graduated. But it was really, really interesting even to see how the knowledge has progressed from that time. And I can kind of summarize essentially what my project was on. But, back then, what I had learned was that estrogen is not dangerous, right? It's how our body excretes or metabolizes that eliminates estrogen. After estrogen does its job in our body, binds to receptors, helps with hot flashes or whatnot, right? We then have to excrete that. And some women, based on genetics, but also just based on lifestyle, can't excrete estrogen as well as they should be. And that's something that we could test for. So my project was on how we can test estrogen metabolism and then how we can improve it. And so for patients who are listening, a lot of our patients have done urine hormone testing. They've done Dutch testing, the dried urine test through Precision Analytical, but really the summary of which, it's hard to sum it up in just a few minutes. But, unlike genetics, right? Patients who have genes for breast cancer are really only 5 to 10% of the population. So we know the other 80, 90% is all related to environment. And so, we can't change genetics per se, but we can change our environment. And so if on this test, if a patient has endometriosis, cysts, fibroids, breast, uterine, prostate, ovarian, even colon cancer, or high risk for that, if we find on this test that they're poor estrogen metabolizers, we can improve that using nutrition. So there are certain markers we look at on this test. Most dangerous is called 4-hydroxyestrone. And if that's elevated, it can lead to DNA damage and then cancer. And so the literature, what I found, reading over 200 papers at that time, was that taking antioxidants like resveratrol and acetylcysteine, we now know glutathione, can help minimize that damage essentially from that marker. And so you don't want to have an elevated 4-hydroxyestrone on your test. We also want to make sure we are improving the 2:16 ratio, those are just 2 other markers on this test. If those are low or unfavorable, this is where cruciferous vegetables come in. So eating more bok choy, kohlrabi, broccoli, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. Every week I tell my patients, get a head of broccoli or cabbage or whatnot, right? Eat it and then get the next. Just constantly be going through those vegetables. That can improve that ratio, but that's also where the supplement DIM comes in. DIM is like eating 6 pounds of those vegetables without the gas. So DIM can improve that 2:16 ratio. And we can also see methylation. This is not DNA methylation. This is estrogen methylation, but we kind of assume DNA methylation probably is going to be reflective of the estrogen methylation. And that's where B vitamins really help. Methylated B vitamins are just one nutritional intervention that can improve methylation. So I think even to this day, because I did this weird project at that time, a lot of my classmates, they know that I was the one that was kind of interested in functional medicine. And now 10 years later, more than 10 years later, functional medicine is becoming more popular. And so, now they're reaching back out to me and asking me questions on certain supplements. And those who I thought maybe weren't even open to this mindset now are becoming open. And so I'm proud looking back that I kind of, I thought outside the box and had a different project, because that, I don't know, I guess that kind of just started this path that I've gone down. So I learned a lot, and I still use that information literally every single day in practice. I mean, hormone replacement therapy, and I'll say safe hormone replacement therapy has been the blunt of my practice. That's how I've built this practice.
I think you have always been, probably even from your friends and family that I've gotten to know over the years, you've always been in any aspect like ahead of the game, ahead of the curve. And so congratulations for one, thinking outside of the box, but then two, it being so pivotal for, like you said, if 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer and it's the leading cause of death, like how relevant. But then two, just even reflectively of just healthcare in general, that's so much of public health. When we talk about disease prevention, it's a lot of the times in the form of vaccinations, colonoscopies, and mammograms, which they serve their purpose for some things. But when we really truly think about prevention, just getting back to like what God gave us, like the food and the air we breathe and stuff like that. And it's exposures.
Those are all early detection. Those are not prevention. A mammogram does not prevent breast cancer. A mammogram can find breast cancer. And I'm not saying don't get a mammogram. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying, why can't we put more emphasis on preventing, right? Like you're saying, these cancers. So what if on patients like, myself, right, who had endometriosis, what if in my teens or my 20s, my mother had tested? I think about this all the time, reflecting back, like, where could my health be now had I known 20 years ago what I know now? But we can't do that. We can only move forward, can't go back in time. But what if we would have done that and I would have been able to improve my estrogen metabolism and my hormone profile, right? Might I have not had the endometriosis and the infertility struggle that I had? I mean, I had to struggle for a reason. And I think God's, taught me empathy for patients who have had health issues. Once we have our own health challenges, then we're like, oh, we empathize with others. And you're thankful for where our health is. So there's a reason to the journey that I've been on. But back to prevention, I think if we would utilize some of these fancier functional medicine testing options, we could prevent a lot more than just cancer.
So for your listeners, when is it most appropriate? And like for me, so I have a daughter who's now 11. When should we get tested for our estrogen metabolites and that 2:16 ratio?
Yeah, I haven't heard a lot of faculty kind of lecture on this exactly. So this is just my personal opinion, but I think we need to wait until they cycle, right? And ideally wait till after they've had, I have some parents who bring their daughters in here and they're like, they got their first cycle, they test my daughter's hormones. And I'm like, well, it's like, give it like 3 cycles, 4 cycles. See if they're having any problems. If they're having no challenges, I don't, it's not absolutely necessary that we test their hormones that first year of bleeding. But after a couple years, after they've really have some sort of regularity, I think it'd be great to test in their teens. And then again, if they're symptom free, maybe wait 5 years, do it again. But where I see more problems is in the 20s and the 30s. And so I think that's where testing should pick up. But there's no reason you shouldn't or couldn't get a baseline in the teens. I guess I'm just saying many teens are not super symptomatic. Right. So I'm not testing a lot of 12 and 13-year-olds. We're waiting a few years. I mean, before I do a lot of testing, but.
Well, and two, just to kind of reiterate what you're saying, the ratios are important for breast health and anti-cancer, but it's also important for, like you said, these symptoms to be anti-endometriosis and stuff like that as well, that you can see those imbalances, correct those imbalances, and really help with like the polycystic ovarian, cysts, and everything, as you'd mentioned.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. So I had originally posed the question of when did you know that you weren't going to follow traditional medicine, but I think it's always apparent that you were raised from the very beginning. What do you feel is going really well in the traditional medical model, if anything?
Oh, we need traditional medicine. I think
Mhm.
there is a time and place for drugs and surgery. And I guess I'll come back to this analogy, which I haven't stated in a while because I haven't been interviewed in a long time, I feel like, but back to that fireman carpenter approach, right? If you have an acute injury,
Mhm.
my son ate a poisonous berry, right? He hasn't barely been sick at all in 4 years, but right, he ate a poisonous berry.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
not a lot the functional medicine was going to offer me at that time, right? I had to take him to the emergency room to make sure everything was okay with his heart, whatnot. If you get in a car accident, if you have a heart attack, we need the fire department to put out the big bad ugly fires, but their two tools are drugs and surgery. And we need those tools, but once those tools have
Hmm.
been utilized upon discharge from the hospital, right? Patients always are not always taught how to prevent future fires. And so that's where functional medicine comes in, being that carpenter, the contractor to try to repair and rebuild the body. So conventional medicine has a right for urgent care, for acute issues, right? Acute
Hmm.
sinusitis, whatever. You get pneumonia, you get in a car accident, whatnot. We do need
Yeah.
drugs and surgery, right? If you have a tumor that needs removed, great. We have amazing surgeons. By all means, go use traditional, conventional healthcare, that fire department. But from a chronic disease management standpoint, I think they've gone wrong because all we do is manage meds. We're not trying to,
Hmm.
back to what we were talking about earlier, the patient's on a proton pump inhibitor, usually they're on it for decades, like decades, and no one has ever
Yeah.
examined their diet. I have patients all the time tell me, I went to my GI and I asked, how could I be eating differently to prevent, heartburn or reflux? And aside from the general minimize acidic foods, they're told diet has nothing to do, with your reflux or your
Hmm.
GI symptoms, which is absolutely bogus. So
Well, it's like they forgot what they learned in med school, but they've completely discounted it because they had learned it, but then it's like you almost, in the day-to-day nuances, or maybe it's just because they work for insurance companies and not their patients, that they don't get the time to be able to work with the patient on the actual prevention and reversal of disease. It's just, here's the Band-Aid.
which is so true, because if you see a patient every 7 minutes and you're getting, you can bill a certain amount for that, the more of those you can see, the more money you're going to make. As I
Hmm.
found out when I tried to bill insurance with my practice, which was a huge lesson to learn, right? Insurance wasn't going to
Hmm.
pay me to talk to a patient for 30 minutes about changing their diet, putting them on an anti-inflammatory diet and taking probiotics.
Hmm.
They didn't want to cover that, right? They didn't want to cover
Right,
my
right.
time. So you could have a big heart as a provider and give patients that time, but you're not going to get compensated for it. And
Yeah.
so I think that's why a lot of doctors just don't do it. And I'm not discrediting many of them. Maybe they are doing it. I just don't see a lot of that. And so
Hmm.
I think that's where conventional medicines unfortunately got it wrong. So
Yeah. So you've had your practice now for 11 years, which is crazy. Like you said, just like how did the time fly like this? But what I've
mhm.
witnessed is just this consistent, beautiful metamorphosis of growth, change, transition from different locations, providers, and just various services for patients. So what's been like the hardest part in doing all of the things that you do under one roof?
I don't know. It's hard. We were talking about this before the interview. I think some patients look at us like we're living some glamorous life, oh, she has a podcast and she has a practice, and this is not
Yeah.
glamorous. This is hard. Let me be very clear. I love what I do, and so do you, or we wouldn't be doing it. But it's been really hard, and we've had very humble beginnings. I mean, I am so proud of this beautiful building we have now. I feel like we've arrived,
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this is our fourth location. My first location, we could hear gunshots. We were downtown Cedar Rapids. Like, it was not the safest place, which is why my husband didn't like me working till 7 p.m.
Hmm.
Like walking to
Yeah.
my car at night. It was legitimately scary. So we had very humble beginnings, and we have had a metamorphosis, and I'm proud of where we've landed, but it's been difficult. And I'll also maybe take this time to go back to a unique story. Just for when I was wanting to start my practice, I thought, how the heck am I going to do this? I'm single. I thought I can take out a business loan. I don't have a lot to lose per se. If I can always go get a job as a nurse practitioner if I fail. I guess that was my
Hmm.
fallback on, like, I'll be okay. But long story short, this was just a big God moment. I've shared with a couple patients over the last several years, but one of my brothers had a pretty severe eye infection on Christmas Eve, and I had started the business. It was like mid-December, and I was still looking for a location. And my mom said, I want to go to this other church. I heard their Christmas Eve service is really great, which we don't usually go to another church, but we went to a different church. And Dr. Noyes, who was a very successful eye doctor who owned Iowa Eye Care here, he greeted us at the door and said, what are you guys doing here? Merry Christmas, whatnot. He was just asking what was going on in our life. And obviously he noticed Ricky's eye, which is very infected, and he should have gone to the eye doctor previously, and Christmas Eve, he said, after this service, we're taking you in. We're going to Iowa Eye Care. I'm going to see you tonight. And my mom's like, it's Christmas Eve. You need to be with your family. And he said, no, we need to take care of this. And so we went to Iowa Eye Care, and I was talking after church Christmas Eve, and Dr. Noyes was talking to me about just my life. And I was telling him I was looking for a spot, and I just hadn't had any takers. Also, I couldn't afford a huge spot at that point. And he said, oh, I have a spot for you. And I said, he told me where it was. And I was like, you're kidding. Like, I can't afford that. Not going to happen. And he said, no, you can, we will make this work. And he was one of those blessings along the way where I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. Yes, I did have to take a business loan, but he let me kind of work the first 6 months, kind of work into the rent, what I could afford as I started seeing patients. He let me use the furniture that was in the waiting room, which I eventually bought. He had a heart for those who were trying to, grow their practices, because he had been there. He'd walked in my shoes. He had started his practice. And sadly, about a year after I started my practice, he passed away of a heart attack. And I just, look back at his funeral was incredible. Like, who says a funeral is incredible? But all the people, I was one of thousands of people this man had blessed through his life. And it's like, if I can leave just a portion of that legacy in my life, job well done, because he was amazing. And I do look back at those God moments, because it was difficult starting off, but yet I feel like there's been a plan, and this has been my passion from the beginning. So I've just followed where I felt like God has been leading me. And you know what? He's blessed us with what we've needed in the times we've needed it. And that was one of the first, like, okay, things are falling into place here. Here we go. We're doing this, because as a female nurse practitioner, pretty much straight out of school in independent practice, there weren't any. This wasn't happening, right? Even the medical doctors, even surgeons. I mean, there are very few that make it in independent practice. It's just too hard. We were talking about overhead before we started, recording this podcast. It's really hard for one provider to cover the overhead of a clinic. And that's been another big stressor of mine, running this business. So, and I can share some others too. I don't know, maybe I should take a breather here, let you say something.
Yeah, no, I think, again, just Dr. Noyes, what a blessing. And then too, our hope and prayer then for ourselves is like, man, then how can we continue to pay those blessings forward, for future generations and future providers. And, too, I think you and I've talked about this in the past, like, man, it's been really, really hard. But when you sit and reflect on that hardness, it's like, we're so grateful that it was hard because of what we learned and what we gained kind of as a result of just that. Man, it is worth the roller coaster sometimes.
Sometimes we question that, but no, it is.
Yeah. Well, and then too, I've heard the phrase, like the cost of education, like I tried to open up a second clinic a couple years ago and just lost a ton of money and hemorrhaged it. And, when I reflect on it, it's just like, yeah, that was the cost of education. And I still learned a lot. It was painful financially, but why is it so simple for us to forget God provides exactly what we need when we need it?
Not when we want it, not when we want it, when we need it. So no, so true. I think another hard lesson I've learned here, which is kind of difficult to talk about on the podcast, because obviously this is public and my staff's going to listen to this, but staffing's been really hard too. And that's a big expense when you lose staff and you have to retrain staff. It's been such a learning experience. Like, you and I are not just clinicians that work, 8 to 5 or whatever the hours are, right? It's like, we have to run the operation. And we've had people, there's a job shortage right now, in nursing, and we could help so many more people if we had more staff on board. Staff are difficult to manage per se, and that their schedules and, all the things that come with each individual's personality and whatnot. But we've had people interview beautifully, and you think this individual is going to be amazing. And then they don't show up to the first day of work, and you're like, what's going on? Or you have, 2 interviews for someone and they don't show up to the third one. And you're like, did that just happen? Just finding the good team has been, we've always had a good team, but because we're small, finding and retaining the staff that you invest in and you train in is hard, because we will never be able to compete with large hospital organizations for, we give retirement, but we can't give the retirement they give. We can't give the amount of health insurance they give. And so it's hard to find the right staff who are okay with that. Like, you and I have made, financial sacrifices with our business. My husband left his job where we had some health insurance to come work for us. for the clinic.
Yeah.
We're like, we take this risk, like, okay, here we go. We're not going to have, some of those benefits, which again, it has panned out. But I think that's been difficult as well. Just, trying to manage, maintain, equip, and like build up that team and have that great energy where we can just conquer the world and serve our patients. And so I think that's another hard part of having the business. And I don't know, there are just so many different difficult pieces, but I think I earlier I said, just caring, I've had this stress kind of on my back too from the very beginning of like, okay, most clinics you go there and they have multiple providers, multiple front office and back office staff. And it's like, I require all that, but I've been, for the most part, the only full-time provider here. So it's like carrying all that overhead and being able to take a vacation and knowing, okay, we're not bringing any money this week. Like that's been really difficult. So we finally have, other providers. We've had some part-time providers through the years. Now we have another full-time provider, and it has made the world of a difference. So I think even like transitioning to cash-based practice was a huge risk that we took. Like looking back, I was so scared to do that. And I know you've done that. And it was the absolute best decision we ever made. And we should have done it before. Just as a small practice, billing insurance, we weren't going to make it. And that's why a lot of them, they just don't make it. And even to communicate to our patients when they come see me, even if they're paying for a half an hour visit, like they're not just paying for my time in that room and that moment, they're paying for all the time ahead of time that we're prepping. The front office is scheduling that patient, and the medical assistants are getting everything in the computer, and they're calling in prescriptions. And, essentially we have front office, back office, all of the overhead of the clinic has to be covered within whatever we're charging that patient for that half an hour visit, whatnot. It's not just like I'm pocketing that money. It goes to the overhead of the huge operation. And so I heard once that the magic number for small practices is 3 providers. If you can have 3 full-time providers, then, overhead is split much better. And we have 2 full-time and a 3rd part-time. And that's a goal that I want to get that 3rd full-time provider, because I think that'll take some of the stress off my back per se. But that is, that's part of the business, part of the struggle. Working somewhere else, I'd probably get 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks paid vacation off.
Yeah.
And that's, not something being self-employed that you get, but that's something that I'm aware of and I've, chosen. I'm here for a reason, but that's part of the struggle. When I'm practicing, I have to practice what I preach when I tell my patients they need time off, but like, I got to take that time off too. And I've learned that the hard way. And from you, even how important it is to schedule in vacations and breaks and whatnot. So.
Well, and I think too, for you and I as mothers and female healthcare providers, one thing that I underestimated growing up, and even like in chiropractic school, it didn't really like dawn on me until I was probably 6 months pregnant myself, but trying to figure out, how am I going to juggle if my kid is sick on a day, or if I'm running late to work because my kid had a crisis, didn't want to put on their shoe to get out the door on time so that I could get on my patients. But then even to supporting my team, who is also largely female and becoming mothers, and that transition, it is a different transition. I mean, I remember when my daughter was born, and I'm sure when William was born, that you're just like, what did I do with my time before William? That it just, that energy emotionally, cognitively that it takes. But then for us to lead teams of female providers and support staff, that's like, oh, you have a sick kid today, or there's a school delay because of the weather, then how does that affect patient care? And it's just one of those.
It's so hard. It's just so hard. Yeah. Because then we're left short staffed. Right.
Yeah.
Even of course I support breastfeeding. That's, I pumped 4 times a day while I was working, but even, for a staff member to be pumping, right, that takes time away from patient care. So it's like, who then has to pick up the slack on that? It's so much a team environment here that we just have to know if someone's coming in late or someone's pumping or, whatever, we all have to work together. But it's hard because what we do is not a desk job, right? We don't all just, sit on our computer. And I mean, we're actively with patients all day long. So it's just tough.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it. Yeah.
I think too, what's humbled me over the years is even just how my patients and your patients have loved on us, and how much our patients have given us grace. There's been time, I mean, my kids, after they were born, they came to work with me because maternity leave, if I wasn't in the office, patients couldn't get care, and
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to support, my team and all that. So my team then would be holding my kids, and my kids would be passed around the office because patients are like, we just want to hold a baby.
Yeah.
And just how humbling that's been for you and I, for patients to love on our kids and pray over our kids, but then also support us in that season of life, as well.
Absolutely. I'm rarely sick. I had food poisoning twice in the past 6 weeks. It was terrible. I hadn't thrown up in like 20 years probably. And, of course, a patient
Mhm.
who had rescheduled twice due to the ice storm, is on that day.
Yeah.
And then I'm sick and I can't come in. And it's just, but they extend that grace. And, nothing we do here is so urgent. So it's okay if we have to push an appointment
Hmm.
out. But I totally agree. Our staff, our staff is amazing, but our patients also have been amazing. We wouldn't be
Hmm.
here today without them. So very thankful for
Well,
that.
and I've witnessed this at your clinic, and then even just in my own, just how much ownership everyone on your team takes, so that this is a small business. If they don't show up, just how hard that is, and put stressors like on everyone else. I was sick at your office getting IVs from that kidney infection, and my husband had a work call, so he drops me off. He has to go do something, and then I'm texting Abby, my girl, to come get me. Meanwhile, Brittany had a sick kid, had her
Oh my
husband take off so
gosh.
that she could come in. And I've witnessed that, though, like, of your support team too, of just like how humbling it is that they understand how important they are to the entire operation, and self-sacrificing for the success of your clinic, my clinic. But like, it is also like from a space of like, they love what we do and what they do as a
Mm-hmm.
part of it.
They love learning. They love our staff meetings. Yeah. And if they know they're going to be late, they're going to get set up for the next day. So they're ready to roll, set up the pellet trays or prep the charts or whatever it
Yeah.
is. They're always thinking ahead because they like being organized also, because we have a smooth running ship and they want to keep it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, can you tell me a couple things in practice? We can talk about the hard things, but what makes it all the more rewarding?
Yeah, I wish I could have spent like a whole hour just writing these things down.
Mhm.
But I obviously it is like seeing the transformation in the patients, like just feeling like I was a vessel, right? I'm not the answer. I'm just a
Mhm.
vessel, right? A tool to
Yeah.
help another. And I mean, when I started, I was like, I felt like I was on an island, like kind of
Mhm.
just doing this weird thing in Iowa and doing, functional medicine here. And I'll never forget some of my first cases. One, I just had a woman literally change her diet. She had a rash covering her body head to toe. And since I've seen tons of these, right? But it's like
Yeah.
they're on steroids for life. They just no one can figure out why they have their rash. And all I did, I think it was gluten. It might have been dairy. I don't know. Took her off
Yeah.
gluten. Still comes and sees me every year. Her skin's
Yeah.
totally, I mean, her entire body had these weird dots, this weird rash. Just changed her diet and
Yeah.
her rash went away and she's forever thankful, right? So there
Yeah.
was another case of the entire family had migraines. We'd have to dim the lights. That one would come in a wheelchair. I mean, they just debilitating migraines. And again, Adam changed the whole family changed their diet, and the migraines went away. Not every case is this easy. I'm not here to just say you change your diet and your life, well, your life will
Hmm.
change, but not
Yeah.
just that it's
Yeah.
going to just fix everything. And I started to like really think, okay, I'm onto something here. Like
Hmm.
this functional medicine thing really does work. And I I guess there are a lot of other cases. I've seen so many women who we've been able to save from hysterectomies, who they were just scared to death to have the surgery. And we did estrogen metabolism testing, we got them on progesterone.
Hmm.
They still have their parts. They're super thankful. Just again, just seeing the gratefulness from these patients and from their husbands. Like I'll have husbands come up to me at church and say, "Hey, thanks for getting me and my wife back." And
Yeah.
jokingly he'll say something like, I don't say my crazy wife, right? Because the wife literally felt like she was losing it,
Yeah.
right? Because her hormones were off and her libido was tanked and she didn't have energy and she was losing her hair, and that can make a marriage fall apart. And so when we get that wife back, that can help that marriage. And so
Hmm.
just having patients, I'll even see one at the airport, just say, "That's my doctor," or like, "Thank you." That warms my heart, and I just knowing that I've played some role in their transition back to freeing them from their sickness to
Hmm.
function so they can accomplish whatever it is in life, be that grandparent at that soccer game without their joint pain, or whatever it is, that just makes it worth continuing. So, yeah.
Well, and I've been so lucky when I sit in your IV room and there's multiple patients in there at the same time. It's been really fun, and it's one of those things that, like, man, I wish like we could record the conversations, but those are very sacred conversations,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about each other's health and health
Mm-hmm.
stories, and some of the stories that your patients, have told me, I appreciate how much that you say that you're just a vessel, that that God's the true physician, that you're a vessel. But what's so cool is the immediate trust that occurs in your office of you did a food sensitivity and you told the patient they need to get off gluten. They did the work, like
Totally, totally.
you showed them, but they were willing to, excuse me, my earbud fell out. But just how much buy-in that they are willing to make, sometimes radical diet lifestyle changes, but how inspiring that when they start feeling good, how they truly sometimes come back healthier than they were ever from like what they can remember. But two, back to the conversations in your IV room, just the beacon of hope that there's something else that could be done. Some of your patients have spent tens of thousands of dollars being yo-yoed around from provider to provider, not knowing or getting kind of garbage diagnosis. Today at our staff meeting, Hannah brought up a patient was diagnosed with pelvic congestion. And we kind of, at first we both kind of like laughed at the diagnosis. I was like, well, actually that really kind of says a lot about what it could be and what we could do to fix that. But patients are getting a diagnosis, but then what do I do with this diagnosis is largely empty. For them. And just
I love new patient appointments because we just get to go through all their paperwork and ahead of time I usually kind of have a game plan just because I see a lot of the same thing over and over and over and over again. But after it's many times after that first visit, the patient is they're glossed over and they're overwhelmed because I've looked at their fingernails and looked at their tongue and just done some things that other providers haven't, but they just are so thankful. Many times they just thank me after the first appointment. And I'm like, don't thank me yet. You can thank me when you're better. Let's wait till wait till we move the needle and, you're feeling better, but they just feel heard because they intuitively have known there's a root cause to why I'm feeling how I'm feeling. And I don't just need a Band-Aid. I don't just need a medication. And so I think that is something that both of our offices do is really extend hope to these patients who have been in waiting for a long time.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just kind of yo-yoing here on our questions that we have. But okay, so let's get clinical for a moment. So I've got a case scenario for you. Let's say I'm 30 years old and I've been living in Cedar Rapids my entire life, which for the viewers that are listening, Cedar Rapids, we had a massive flood in downtown in 2008. And then in 2020, we had a land hurricane called the derecho, where our town sustained for over an hour winds at over 100 miles an hour. The town was devastated and wrecked, and much of our state was, frankly, as this storm rolled through. But we've had some patients and some of our providers didn't have electricity for 14 to 16 days. It was wild, but I give that context because I know where Stephanie's going to go with either a flooded community or damage from a storm with water. But okay, so I'm 30 years old. I've been in Cedar Rapids. I have a 2-year-old. I'm fatigued, losing my hair, and I'm told that this is normal after baby. I've gained 20 pounds postpartum, despite a similar diet and physical activity over the years. My sleep has never been great, but I did have a history of 10 years of being on birth control. I have generalized anxiety, and my gut seems fine. I have a good marriage and a good job. So where do you start?
Yeah, I'm just writing some things down here. To echo on that land hurricane, it was devastating. I will say our clinic literally did not have power for 7 or 8 days. So we had to close. I remember sitting at Hy-Vee, our grocery store, because I was trying to just refill meds on patients because we didn't have electricity at home. If you can't get on the internet, you can't refill scripts. It was such a whirlwind. But I did get
well, even in that. I believe it. But even in that, to echo you, we still have patients and some of the kiddos that have almost a little bit of PTSD.
Totally. If they were in their car
that they were either car.
Yep. So that's a whole nother, but we'll just pretend this individual was safe in her home during the derecho, didn't have any of those risk factors. So again, this is kind of hard because I typically ahead of time will go through the new patient paperwork. So it's I think it's like a 10-page questionnaire. So we're asking them everything from yes, do you have any trauma like the derecho, whatnot, to were you breastfed? Were you C-section? Have you had a lot of antibiotics through your life? Have you been on birth control like you were disclosing with this patient? So typically I will have patients fill out this whole questionnaire so I can get a gauge of, Do they have a big burden? Have they been exposed to water damage buildings with mold? Do they have metal in their mouth, right? We're running this full questionnaire. And then by the time I come in and see them, I kind of follow up on that questionnaire, asking them questions, and then determine, we always start first appointment with labs and some general supplement and diet recommendations. So for this individual, what did you say she had? So she has hair loss, she's tired. So we definitely want a full thyroid workup, which more than likely she's had a TSH checked, but we would do a full thyroid workup on her to see specifically where her T3 is. I'd also run a comprehensive nutritional analysis on her, right? She had a baby. I don't know if this doesn't say if she was breastfeeding, but if she was breastfeeding, she's donating all that nutritional value to her child. So she may be left nutritionally starved, right? So there are a lot of causes for hair loss, but one could be stress. Another could be nutritional deficiencies, low thyroid, even mold could cause hair loss. So I'd run a nutritional analysis on her. What else did you say? Well, I'd check her sex hormones for sure. Just a lot of times those can go wonky, and it sounds like, again, she's losing hair. Could that be higher androgens? She's having some anxiety. Could that be low progesterone? I would check sex hormones for sure. We could check, what else did you say? GI seems fine. Well, even though it seems fine, she's having some mental health issues, so the gut may not be fine. So I would still ask how she's eating. And some of my patients are actually eating really pretty clean coming to me. If she wasn't eating clean, I would absolutely get her off processed foods, have her eat real food, and then we could run a food sensitivity test. Sometimes we'll do a stool test as well. I usually start the first appointment with just a few tests. So maybe we would do thyroid hormones, food, and nutritional evaluation. That's a great start. We're going to get tons of information from that, which can then help guide if we do need to go down the heavy metal path, or maybe the yeast path or whatnot. So we just have to start somewhere. So I would definitely run some labs. I mean, we could just keep talking through this case. You kind of brought up the derecho. So yeah, if she's had exposure to water damaged buildings, that could be a huge, huge problem. Though toxins from mold can inhibit weight loss, can cause hair loss, can cause the anxiety. So I would definitely explore that. I usually start with some biomarkers in the blood for mold. They're really weird, but TGF-beta1, C4a, C3a, and if those are abnormal, then I'll do some urine mycotoxin testing on the patient. If she's stressed, we could look at her adrenals, run a cortisol test, whatnot. But I also want her to leave with hope. So while she's waiting for all these tests, whatever they are that we determined to run, right, are coming back, I'd probably put her on magnesium, because almost everyone's low on magnesium. So I'd put her on some magnesium at night, give her probably some L-theanine, just because I'm biased. I love that. L-theanine for her, daily anxiety. And I want her to leave with some basic nutrition. So if she's taking nothing, I'd put her on either mitochondrial complex or a prenatal vitamin, something like that. I also would check her iron and her ferritin, because you're going to have hair loss with low iron and ferritin. So that would just be a start. We can dive deeper if you want, because there could be all kinds of things going on with this patient, but usually we start kind of superficial with those tests. And then if we're not finding something, I tell the patient, guess what? We have to dive deeper, right? We just have to dive deeper.
Well, and I wanted to pose the question just so your viewers could listen to the method of your madness unfold about all of the different spaces and places of where you wanted to look with just a little bit of history. But that case history is so not uncommon, right? Especially with postpartum, that it's not earth-shattering. And I never mean to throw, primary care or traditional healthcare under the bus. I think sometimes my energy or my language does. I mean, it's just the general testing is, patients be like, I had all my labs done and they were told that they were fine. And, you're talking about a complete thyroid, that we're going to look at the entire thyroid, not just one brain hormone that is supposed to turn on the thyroid, but really filling in the gaps of, we look further and deeper. And like you said, you start superficial. It doesn't have to be all of the panels all at once. You start fixing the gut, you're going to start helping fix and rebuild, any thyroid dysfunction in that work, and so on and so forth. So I said that just because I wanted patients to hear how you operate, but also part of your processing. I always joke when I'm referring patients to your clinic, I was like, all right, here's the deal. You need to get, the last 3 years of labs that you've done, and the intake is impressive. But it's because Stephanie reviews all of those even before you meet her. So she's got a 1-page list of questions for you that she wants answered, and she's already got a working game plan somewhat set up in her mind's eye before she meets with you. And then you have the face-to-face dialogue, which nothing changes that it's so hard to put a price point on the value of that face-to-face conversation and dialogue with your patients. But sometimes patients are like, this is going to take me, 3 days to get all this information over it. And I'm like, trust me, it's worth it so that she can really honor your time when you are there, that she knows you a lot more than you know before she's
Mhm.
even met you.
Case in point, like yesterday I had a patient who she's been dizzy. I can't even remember all her symptoms, but like I was just looking at her past labs and she has low sodium, right? No one's ever told her she had low sodium. She probably just needs some salt and some electrolytes. She was drinking so much water. She's depleting her sodium, whatnot. She also, what else? A lot of these patients have like barely within the range B12. So, right. So just by looking at the labs, I can kind of gauge, well, if she's low on B12, she's probably low on a lot of other nutrients. So she's low on sodium, low on
Mm-hmm.
B12, borderline anemic, borderline low thyroid, has an ANA that's, slightly positive. All of these things her doctor says you're fine, right, for. But
Yeah.
we're seeing all these subtle changes. So then all these things I'm wanting to improve and follow up on, right? But so many patients are just told their labs are normal when they actually are cueing us into something is not normal in the body that we need to figure out.
Well, just those ranges that, that the labs give us, it's like, well, you're not diagnosable or clinically feeling crappy enough yet.
Mm-hmm.
But just how you can, like iron, that range for iron is, what is it? Is it like 30 to 151? And it's like, even just a further question for the females, like, did you get that lab while you
When you
were
were
cycling?
bleeding or when you were not bleeding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you
Yeah.
weren't
Because,
bleeding, then when you are bleeding, you probably are really low. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just being able to, and then two, what I find so interesting is the timing of when patients get their labs drawn. Like I always want my patients first thing in the morning for
Mm-hmm.
pretty much all the labs, but I always say first thing in the morning so that then when I do retesting, we're comparing apples to apples as much as humanly possible on these labs. Um,
Totally agreed. I think there are certain situations, without going too clinical here, where I will have patients get morning labs and then I'll also have them get afternoon labs. Like if patients think they need more thyroid medication in the afternoon, I'm like, okay, let's do your labs in the morning and let's also do them at 3 p.m. and let's see how your hormones have tanked by that
yeah.
time. So there are certain times where it is valuable to get afternoon labs, but for the most part, yes, morning is what we recommend for sure.
Yeah. All right, changing the pace here a little bit. Stephanie, I want you to share with us kind of about your faith walk. I've witnessed so many great people in your life over the years, from your wedding shower to your baby shower, and just some really incredible, prayerful people in your life, very spiritual. And I think everything that you do is because of the blessings God's given you from what you're able to learn and what you're able to share. But do you mind sharing with me in your own words about your faith?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm blessed to have been raised in a Christian family. I always grew up going to Christian school, so I accepted Jesus as my savior really early, and then again and again, because
Mm-hmm.
at church you're always like accepting Christ into your heart. But I thank you for just bringing this up because again, it's a good reminder of all of the people that I have had in my life, especially my parents, right, praying for me from the beginning. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just for my success, for me to find what my passion is and to be able to help people through it. And even with William, I mean, we went through a huge infertility struggle there, and we had so many prayer warriors. I mean, just praying for us. And then my birth story, which maybe we'll get to, I almost died. It was bad. And again, it had all these prayer warriors. So I've just been so fortunate. Like it's like I've almost not ever known what it's like to not have that. I mean, and so for me, even saying it out loud, it makes me be like, geez, I really need to appreciate this because I've always been so grateful to have had Christian parents who believe in the power of prayer, who have really supported me. And I've always been involved in our, church community, went to Christian schools till high school. So yeah, I think I just have been very fortunate in that regard.
Well, do you think even to just the humbling reality that sometimes like giving all the knowledge that sometimes, as a healthcare provider, we can make that a worldly gift, or a worldly focus, that having the tools that you have, but then just that ultimate surrender. I know, especially before you guys conceived William, that you were like, all right, here it is, God. And just how
Mhm.
great, though, that he still provided an answer to a prayer that was great. I also know he's answered some other prayers that you've had maybe as no or no for right now,
Mhm.
but you've been consistently faithful regardless of how Jesus and God respond to those prayers.
Yeah, you're right. Coming back to what you first said, like we're tools and we're vessels. And I think we have to give God the credit because sometimes I have really hard cases and I'm like, wake up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. and I'm just thinking about that patient and God's helping me connect the dots to, oh my gosh, I need to test her for this, or oh my gosh, that thing that happened with patient A, I need to do with patient C, or I don't know, I just feel like, again, I need to be thankful, but need to give God the credit because he is the miracle worker. And we can have all the tools in the world, but at the end of the day, he's the miracle worker. And I've seen that with a lot of my patients. So
amen. Amen. One of your notes here, you kind of talks about, and you've mentioned this too throughout our talk today, but just how many God moments, that you had shared a story about a stranger coming into the office. And do you want to share that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've had so many of these, and again, I need to just write them all down. And I will, because I want to make a video, I wanted to do a video for our 10th anniversary in practice, but that didn't quite happen, but I will, I'm going to get that made. I'm going to get that done. Yeah. I remember one day just being like, because you go through these, any entrepreneur is going to go through these ups and downs where it's like, we're on fire. This is awesome. Right. And then you crash. You're like, this is terrible. I can't do this anymore. And then you're like, you go through these emotional ups and downs and financial, ups and downs. I remember there was a time. So again, my husband quit his job. So we have it's not that we didn't have benefits. We were paying a lot out of pocket for a very high deductible plan of benefits. And I didn't have any backup. Like I do have a lot of friends who later in life, they're very financially secure. They quit their job and they go start a business, but they're really not taking on a huge risk, like the risk that we had in that moment. Right. And so who gets paid first when you have a team? Not you, your team gets paid.
Everybody else. Yeah.
Meanwhile, I have student loans, business loans, right? And I remember at that time, there was a day where Eric and I were legitimately like, we're not going to make payroll, and the week's going by and we're like, okay, Tuesday wasn't so good. Maybe Wednesday will be the day. Wednesday's not so good. Maybe Thursday. Right. And we're like, we're legitimately not going to make payroll. And there were a lot of moments where we were close, but this was years ago, but it was bad. And a complete stranger walks in and bought $1,000 worth of the Argentine silver, big bottles, just like wiped us out. And Eric and I are looking at each other like, did that just happen? Like, I knew it was a big order, but at that moment, $1,000 was a lot, it's like, we just made payroll plus, like we're going to be okay. Like God had us covered that week. And so, but back to, again, just trusting that in his timing and in his place, like, I'm not saying we haven't had hard moments. We have had a lot of hard moments, but just, trusting that he's going to somehow, some way, we're going to make ends meet, that we're supposed to be doing what we're doing keeps us going. So that is a cool story that I've shared with our staff over the years.
Yeah. I love it. So I love talking about you and your health, and I joke about this because you're the queen in this industry, but yet I appreciate how you do share your struggles and like what you've learned along the way. And so I joke that this is a highly vulnerable question, but what have been like your story as far as what's humbled you the most with regards to your specific health, managing all that you do from, like you said, you wake up at 2 a.m. thinking about a patient, and how do you manage, the stress and your own hormone health and relationships along the way?
Yeah, well, I think it's no secret at this point that I think infertility was the hardest thing for me because I run a hormone clinic. So I feel like a hypocrite when I'm helping women left and right get pregnant, but I cannot get pregnant. I thought, God, why are you doing this to me? Like you just get angry and resentful, and it's just no secret. I can say this now looking back, saying that I have a healthy son, William, right? But in the moment, it was really hard. It was really hard when we'd celebrate getting these calls that our patients are pregnant, right? Put them on progesterone or whatever. I talk about some of these in my book, but yet here I am with an empty womb, right? I was an older mother. I had William at 35. Most of my friends were done having kids by that time when I had, William, and we're hoping for another. But it was very humbling. And I think sometimes patients thought, like, is she gonna have kids? Can she have kids? What's her problem? It's hard, and infertility is very hard to talk about. And I think that's something that I really do want to more specialize in over the years, as the more and more I've learned right through my journey. But obviously in my book, I talk about my gastrointestinal kind of health as well. Not that I had a lot of lower GI issues, but I had a lot of upper GI issues. I had SIBO and fructose intolerance and a lot of that gas and pressure was causing palpitations. I had tachycardia also because I was in sympathetic overdrive. And I just didn't realize, again, you've been a great, I don't know what you call it, someone to kind of set me straight with my need to take time off from work. But there were years where I look back and man, I pushed it. We had, some family stressors in our life, and that I am thinking, I'm going to have to take care of our whole family. I got to push through. I got to build a business and build a house. And, I pushed through really hard, and my health paid the price. And I do regret that, because I think all the stress that I went through in grad school and starting a business, and I think a lot of that stress led to my tachycardia and some of my infertility, and because it was robbing me of progesterone. And thankfully I have William, but there were hard years there. And I haven't touched gluten since, and that's fine. I can live without gluten. I got my SIBO for the most part under control, although this food poisoning I got a month ago flared some things up, but I have the knowledge to get back to where I need to get back to. So I haven't just because I have this health clinic and this knowledge doesn't mean my health is, where I want it to be 100%. It's been a journey for me too, but I love learning and I love using that knowledge. That's been the coolest part, is using, again, everything I learned from my story. I then kind of specialized in SIBO, right? So I can use my struggles for the better of my patients. So I've learned a lot through what I've struggled with, that's for sure.
Yeah, amen to that. Okay, so what are your top 3 non-negotiables in your household? So for example, what's your thoughts on screen time or electronics, superfood, no activities on Wednesday nights, family dinners, sacred? Where are you at on the 3 non-negotiables?
I take my vitamins. It might sound silly, but might be partly psychological, but I take my vitamins every single day. I have vitamins. If you look at my purse, I probably look like a supplement junkie, but I swear they work for me. And I always have. I've just always been. And same with William. Every morning he's getting his supplements. Eric, you can ask him how often he takes his vitamins. Although I do see little reminders in his phone, take your vitamins. So he's getting a lot better. So I think I'm really religious about taking vitamins. Having a whole house water filter is a non-negotiable. I will never go without that. It's hard for me to even shower at hotels because of the chlorine that I smell. You go on vacation, we were just on vacation in Florida, and putting William in a bath, I'm just oh my gosh, this water smells terrible. So I think that is just something that's really important to me. And then from an electronic standpoint, we do shut off our Wi-Fi every single night. I will wake up in the middle of the night. It's I can sense if it's on. And I'm not sleeping well enough, I'll go shut it off if we forgot whatnot. So just getting that Wi-Fi off at night, sleep is sacred to me. Because I've had tachycardia, I cannot have caffeine. I can barely have chocolate, only a little bit of sugar, right? So I can't just, Eric can, power through with coffee. That is not an option for me, which is probably why I rely on my supplements so much. But sleep is so sacred to me. And so I go to bed early. I like to try to go to bed by 9. You got to get sleep before midnight. I have a fan on. I have my sleep mask. It's a cool environment. The Wi-Fi is off. Sleep is sacred to me. And then I would say exercise too. I mean, I'm not the most fit person in the world, but exercise has always been important to me. And I think it's a stress reducer. So, those might not sound that creative, but those are my non-negotiables.
Yeah, no, I love it. So then flipping that, what are your guilty pleasures? Better, but you just can't help it. So full disclosure, I'll go first. Mine are the peanut butter patty Girl Scout cookies, fruit snacks, and then Cheetos. Cheetos are the absolute worst, not real food possible. And I literally cannot help myself. If I see Cheetos, I'm
we need to invent some organic, non-GMO, dairy-free.
I know.
Those hippies, have you had the cheddar hippies?
No.
They're puffs.
I'll go get it now.
They're dairy-free and hippies. They're pea protein. Those are really good. We eat a lot of those at our house.
Hippies. Okay.
I mean, this sounds so bad. And I think Eric is I don't know how you do this, but I was just raised in a family who ate very bland. We ate very healthy, but very bland, which was even to my detriment when I was having tachycardia, because I had a pot situation going on where I had low blood pressure because I wasn't getting enough salt in my diet, which was also causing tachycardia. So all that to be said, maybe my palate never developed to the point where I'm this foodie, but Eric has to season everything, and he's a great cook.
Yeah.
I'm not there aren't anything that I just there's nothing that I just super miss, but I will tell you what I enjoy. So I've always liked chocolate covered berries. That's a treat that I like. Most of them are not organic, and they have soy and dairy and all kinds of crap in them. So I try to find them higher quality versions, but I like that. I will say I do like fried food. I went so long gluten-free without any fried food that like now there's a restaurant in town where you can get, gluten-free fries and gluten-free fried food. And I go there. So,
Yeah. You're supporting local business.
Yeah. So I think, I used to love dairy. I used to love grilled cheese. I just don't, I've kind of lost that.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think if I could get, which I still haven't found, gluten-free, like cheese curds, gluten-free fried pickles, I think it would be, my vice would be fried something. But I think it was because I was so deprived of it for so long. It's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
And then a margarita. You're a sucker for a margarita every now and then.
Yes. So yes, I love Mexican food, and I will have a margarita and Mexican food any day. Yes.
I love it. I love it. If you could eat anything without repercussions, what would it be?
So if I really can't have gluten, but if I could have gluten, I think I would have like a pretzel with cheese, like those soft pretzels. I haven't had one of those for like 15 years. I think I would have one of those. And I think I would go to Starbucks again, because I can't have caffeine. So I will go to Starbucks and I will get a pumpkin spice latte, or I used to every single morning, I used to get an iced doppio with 2 shots of something. It was probably caramel. I think I would get something like that. I love pizza. But I can have pizza. You can get gluten-free pizza, but I think that's what I would have if there were no repercussions. And maybe one day I'll have that.
I love it. Well, I remember when we did that cabin in the woods and you brought snacks. I'm always like, yes, what is Stephanie bringing for snacks that I need in my life? And I I see this like cheese wheel and I'm eating like half of this wheel, like stuffing it in my mouth. I'm like, Stephanie, why did you bring this delicious dairy? Like, I know you can't have it. And you're like, that's a vegan cheese. And like my world exploded with like, this is amazing. Do you remember what
it was Miyoko's, the chive?
Yes.
It's a vegan, so it's
Yes.
almond based. It's a soft cheese wheel. Because dairy-free cheeses are hard to find, but the soft cheeses, I could eat the whole thing. It's so good.
I feel like you need to have a podcast on like, here's the snacks, here's the foods that we eat that I can't eat, just because there's so much out there. And it's like, ooh, do I want to buy that $10 box of those chips? Like, I don't know if it's going to be
like
really
those
good.
hippies I mentioned. Yes, you do want
The
to buy those.
hippies. I mean,
I've done a good job of finding
valuable
snacks.
Yes.
I will say I've done it. Maybe that's why I'm not deprived, because I've just sought out what are these snacks that I could still have. And I
that
have
are
them.
fast, convenient, and tasty. Yes.
Okay, that's a good idea. I'll do that.
I love it. Okay, girlfriend, if you could write a letter to dear younger Dr. Stephanie Gray, what would you tell her?
This is tough because it's like in regards to what? In regards to, we've talked so much about business. So in regards to business or marriage or my personal life, like, or all of the above.
I want it all.
Okay. I think I would say to forgive easily, because I hear this in my patients all the time. I mean, they tell me their story and their life stressors, and I'm not saying you have to forget, but I think forgiving is really important. And I've read a lot of books on forgiveness, and I wish I would have 10 years ago. So I think from a personal standpoint, I would say that knowing, again, back to me saying, oh, I wish I knew what I knew now 10 years ago. I think I would also tell myself, skip the chemical hair straightener, skip the Bath and Body Works and the Victoria's Secret, all those toxic products. I have really curly hair. Nobody really knows that I straighten. And I think had I have not, again, used all of those, because I was raised in a really healthy household, I don't think what I was eating was contributing to endometriosis. I think it was those toxic personal care products that I overused and abused that contributed to infertility. So I would tell myself, skip that, probably say, wear your hair curly or something. I don't know.
I love it.
I took the Ultimate Journey class at House of Hope here locally, and I highly recommend it. It was a big commitment. I put it off for like 5 years, and because it's like 4 hours a week for 12 weeks. It was a big commitment I did several years ago, before William, actually. And they take you back to your childhood. And, what I realized is that I had kind of skipped out on a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. I've had a good life. I have, but I think I was always the one that was responsible. And there's pros in that. That's probably helped to get me to where I am today. But I think I haven't had as much fun as I could have. So I think I would tell myself, right, to go for more walks and get outside and just have more fun. I think I would tell myself that, to more learn to live in the moment. And then, I have a very happy marriage, but I think I would tell myself to go on more dates with my husband. One of our great family friends, been a very loyal patient for years. She told me, even just last week, she said, every year you have to get away with your husband. You have to get away with your husband. And Eric's already planning our trip, but I wish I would have done that from day one. Right.
Yeah.
And that's just something that I don't want to leave William. I don't want to, I don't want to go away, but it is working on that marriage, being in some sort of marriage therapy and having dates and, taking a trip as a married couple annually. I think I would tell myself that. And I would also tell myself to have thick skin, because I've developed thick skin, as have you, running a business. I think, if someone, for all of the followers we've had, the loyal patients, right, there are also naysayers. And I think a lot of my patients don't see that aspect of how we have to have thick skin against those who maybe don't support what we're doing. And so I think I would tell myself, it's going to be okay. If you have haters, that you're doing something right. You're being progressive, you're moving in the right direction. But I didn't hear that early on. And so I think I would tell myself to have that thick skin and to really not sweat the small stuff. And I would also tell myself that it's not my job to save the world, because I think you and I carry this weight. I love being a detective. I love helping patients, get to the root cause of their problem. And 90% of my patients are very compliant, but the 10% that aren't, they're hard to have. And then I want to take on that responsibility, but I can't fix them until they take responsibility, for themselves. So I think I would tell myself that you can't save the world. But I would also, I don't know, I think I would tell myself, get involved in a mastermind sooner than I did. And I would, as I learned through this ultimate journey class, like I learned you have to love yourself and you have to forgive yourself. And so I think I would tell myself it's going to be okay and good job and you can do this. And I don't know, we should probably do this. And the ultimate journey, they actually have you go back and write letters to your childhood, like very early on childhood. Yeah. But just thinking of this question, I think it would be very therapeutic for even the listeners to go back and say, like, what would we tell the earlier version of ourselves? But also you need to learn to love yourself and clap for yourself and be your cheerleader, for where you are at currently in your life.
Yeah, no, I love it. So, hey, you brought up this mastermind. You want to talk about that? What you've done?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in a couple different groups, but essentially it's healthcare. This is the one that I think you're referencing is specific to healthcare entrepreneurs, because again, like when I started this business, I was alone, and aside from you and a couple other people, like there weren't a lot of others that I could say. My practice was so different. It was just so different. Like I felt like I was on an island. And so it's been great to network with other healthcare entrepreneurs, doctors, chiropractors, acupuncturists, different sort of healers, right, from all over the nation, all over the world, actually, seeing how the changes they made in their practice and just learning from them, because I wasn't going to just, quite frankly, get that here in Iowa. So that's been very helpful and excellent networking. I mean, if you listen to my podcast, then a lot of the guests on there have come through that networking group. So I've learned so much, and reflecting back, I wish I would have got involved in a mastermind way earlier than I did, but it's a huge financial commitment. So it's one of those things. It's like, is this going to pay out? Is it going to be worth, what you're investing in? And it very much did.
Yeah, I love it. I think what I've witnessed for you from what you did with the mastermind, not only did it help your business, but it also helped you expand your own knowledge base in how you care for your patients on the wide variety of topics, from mold to even, you just had that, and of course her name's escaping me, but you talked all about uric acid. And
Betty Murray, she's in the mastermind too. Yep.
Yeah. And just, how profound one little measurement of uric acid and all the implications in health and what it does, but to get that level of nitty gritty, and how you get to bring that back now to every single one of your patients.
Absolutely. That's why I love podcasting, because I learn from the guests every single time. It's like, this is awesome. Like I'm taking copious notes and yep.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for sharing it, not only with me, but with all of your viewers. I mean, we all gain based on your investment in producing the podcast and getting this information out there. And that's what's really exciting too, I think, about functional medicine and how people find you, is that they're so curious about what they can do and educating themselves. 10 years ago, this information wasn't on the internet and wasn't on podcasts. And now,
I was the witch doctor back then, but now it's like, oh, she's doing the cool thing. She's doing,
turns out you've been right this entire time. And I think, too, it's because of pioneers like you, though, willing to be the oddball out, that it does create a space for others to do it now, because we look up to you on what you've done and what you've created. And, in chiropractic, I love chiropractic. As we've talked about before, the great thing about I use this quote a lot. The great thing about chiropractic, there's over 200 techniques and philosophies out there. The bad thing about chiropractic, there's over 200 techniques and philosophies out there. So even in our clinic with 4 different providers, we have some overlap and similarities, but then there's some things that we do very different. When a patient walks in with low back pain, Dr. Nate's going to treat it from one approach, and I might treat it from a different approach, which is great. But in Iowa, since chiropractic started in Iowa, in Cedar Rapids alone, I think there's like 150 of us chiropractors, maybe more, and growing. And so scarcity mindset, as far as like, oh, is that chiropractor competition? Like in our world, no. It's really great that we have such a diversity in the types, but it can feel lonely because you're the only one, or you were the only one for so long. And I know that you welcome space for more providers to practice this way, because, it's 6 to 9 months before I can get on as a new patient to be with you.
But not for the other providers. You can get on to see them
Yeah.
sooner.
Yeah.
Just to be
Yeah.
clear for listeners.
Yeah. But that's what's, so great about the investment of what you've done and how much you're educating people for them to take ownership of their health, and easy practices to put them into play. Okay, tell me about, let me go to this next question here. Running a business, writing a book, hosting a podcast, how do you find time to prioritize yourself and your mental health?
It's tough, and it's been a challenge. And so I can't fib and lie here and say I got this all figured out, because I don't. I think balance is hard to achieve. But again, this is kind of why I ended up with tachycardia. I think I was doing too much. And so I literally had to slow down. I literally could not get on the treadmill because my heart rate was so high. So I was forced. I think God was literally screaming at me saying, slow down, right?
Yeah.
So what I've had to do, and again, I've learned this from you and some books that you've recommended I read, is to literally just create the margin. I've had to, excuse my language, but schedule the crap out of my life. Like Eric knows, so just making these subtle changes, when I look back at them, thinking, I can't believe, I was so nervous to, like, on Monday, I said, I want to come in 1 hour late on Monday, and the team's like, what? And Eric's like, what? Because that's 2 fewer patients or whatever. No, if I can come out 1 hour late on Monday, I can work out in the morning and take William to school. Like, there are just a couple things I have to just schedule, which thankfully, having my own business, I can do that, but I've had to schedule margin into my life. And so Eric knows I'm going to exercise Monday morning, Wednesday morning, and then Saturday. Like, I'm going for a long run or whatever. Like, he knows how I've had to schedule my life out. But it took me, it was, I don't know why, but it was so hard for me to do that. And I had to also hear it from someone else, not my husband, right? But hear it from someone else, like, that most people who run their own business don't see patients 5 days a week. Like, it's okay to take, because when I started, I would take 1 day off a month as an admin day, but I was doing payroll. I was doing everything at that point, right? And so for me, actually hearing from someone else, it's okay to take a day off from seeing patients, because you have to manage the business operation. Because when are you going to manage the business operation? And when are you going to stay progressive and do continuing education? And when are you going to even do things like help with staff culture and plan team meetings? And, when are you going to do those things? So I scheduled a day. Wednesdays are my admin days. Those are my admin days. And granted, half of a day is podcasting now. So I get my other half day for admin. And I'm bombarded with questions from all the other team, but I'm away from patient care. So it allows me that mental margin time. And I'll tell you, my goal is to have Fridays off work. I'm not there yet, but my goal is to actually have a day away from the office. And so I think for me, it just involved really setting my boundaries with my time to have margin, to exercise, knowing, just kind of scheduling our day. We're going to go to bed by 9 o'clock, whatnot. So I think that's been hugely helpful. Just scheduling.
Why sometimes it seems so simple, but so hard to implement, right? No, I hear you. Okay, as a mom of a toddler, I'd love to hear your suggestions that other busy moms could use to make health and wellness on a time and budget priority.
So Eric is shocked at what I let William eat. Like, sometimes he's the one who has William eat healthier than I. Like, I never thought I would be that mom that's just like, yes, you can have a cookie.
Yeah.
But I sometimes am that mom. But what I will say is that, when we started, when I had William, when we started having children, when we had William, that first year, he was for the most part gluten, dairy free. And we introduced a lot of, foods, and we were doing a great job. the first year was a whirlwind because I had a 4-week maternity leave. So I was back at work full time, and it was just absolutely nuts. I remember by his first birthday, I had a fruit cake that I had made. It wasn't cake, it was like literally made out of fruit. And then Eric's mom, his grandma, had brought a little, what do you call it? Not a pound cake, a smash cake. I hadn't even heard of a
Oh.
smash cake. I didn't even know what these things were. And
Yeah,
and which was cute. She did that out of the kindness of her heart. But I'm like, he hasn't had sugar yet. He doesn't need sugar. Why are we giving him a cake? And he sure enough touched it. He didn't want it. He didn't want
yeah,
the sugar. He wanted the fruit, which I was like, thank God for.
yeah,
So I would definitely advise to not introduce sugar for sure, because once you do, then you're screwed. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah.
But I will say my tips for moms who want to keep their kids healthy, because generally speaking, William hasn't been sick in 4 years, other than he did have croup, got it from school last week, and he's over it now. But I highly recommend you feed your kids real food. Like some of the things that school or family, right, members have given him, if you read the labels, I'm like, I'm not putting that in my child's mouth. The artificial dyes,
Hmm.
artificial crap, he's going to be hyper. He turns into a little maniac. I can see it, immediately. So my advice would be feed your kids real food. And I'm going to go back to supplements. And I say this on the podcast, you cannot out supplement a poor diet. You have to feed your
Hmm.
kids real food. But I do think supplements you're going to pay for them up front, but they're going to save you money on the back end. Right. And I
Hmm.
even go back to
Hmm.
the families who I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Like, we had neighbors who had great insurance, and every time they're sick, they're going to the doctor and getting antibiotics. Well, I look at a lot of those families back then who were on drugs all the time, but we were jealous that they had a, low deductible plan.
Hmm.
So many
Hmm.
hundreds of those families come and see me as patients now because
Yeah.
their health is not awesome for various conditions. And I look back at, we're pretty healthy. We didn't really go to the doctor that often, didn't take a lot of drugs. And for the most part, we're in pretty good shape. And so I'm trying to kind of emulate that with William. But all that being said, my parents always had us on vitamins. So I am
Hmm.
a huge follower or whatever, believer in supplements. So William gets his multivitamin every day, his vitamin D drops every
Hmm.
day. He gets immune support when he's sick, the VibraKid product. He gets his fish oil and his probiotic at night. He gets his supplements and he likes them and they taste good. And so I think that's going to save you money and it's going to benefit your child's health on the back end. So I guess I would say eat real food, don't introduce sugar, give your kid their supplements. Um, and take them to see a chiropractor. William's seen a chiropractor from the very
Amen.
beginning. So I think
Amen to that, girl.
every time
So,
William gets a fever, he's getting adjusted. So I think those would be my pieces of advice.
well, and I grew up under chiropractic care as well. My parents,
Mhm.
we were very fortunate that my parents were in tune to chiropractic as well. And I'll never forget in high school, on dance team, I would watch girlfriends, pop Tylenol and ibuprofen. And it was so foreign to me that at first I'm like, are you sick? Like you're taking a medication. Like, is everything okay? And, like, and even my husband, he did not grow up under chiropractic care, but like that's when we went to the chiro, like, oh, you don't feel good. That's when you come in,
Mhm.
your immune system is being challenged. Let's support it in a way. But to echo you on the supplements, when my kids were like Porter, I can't remember at what age we started giving her. We originally had liquid omega-3 fatty acids that we would just
Mhm.
give her like in a spoonful. I can't remember when we introduced the chewable multivitamin, but she never flinches at the taste.
Mhm.
Neither of my kids do, and even with the fish
Yeah.
oil. But then, like I've witnessed patients, and nieces and nephews that, if you're not until like 8 or 9 or 10, and your palate is used to sugar, some processed foods,
Yeah.
you kind of almost like wrinkle your nose. Or when patients go off pop, for 2 months and then they get a taste of pop, they're like, now I don't like it. Well, it's because they've shifted their palate so much. So
Mhm.
even sometimes, parents, they'll say that to me. They're like, oh, they just don't like the taste. I'm like, hey, I don't want it to be a traumatic event or an argument every morning, but just gently encourage it or say, hey, let's just try one today to get them
Yeah.
to, acquire the taste for it, or that they're like, I'm just so used to feeling good that this taste thing is no longer an issue.
Start them young. Start them young on the
Yeah,
vine.
yeah, that I feel like that's just been the easiest, that we just didn't make a thing, but they're like, yeah, I do it. Similarly, my kids, they've never been vaccinated, but they've had blood draws like a lot.
Mhm.
And even we recorded it for our website, Dr. Hannah poking my kids' finger, but we never made a big deal about it. I always explain like, yeah, it's going to be a poke, but you will be okay. And you can hold your teddy bear. And I've had him do a couple different lab draws because I'm a curious mom
Yeah.
and I want the data and,
Hmm.
but even just like walking him through that, if I were to take him today, it wouldn't be a big issue to get a lab draw because we've never made it a big issue, but have had the dialogue around it. So sometimes whether it's supplement or a lab draw, it's our own fear. We can project that on our kids if we're not careful.
I watched that video and Cooper was a trooper.
Yeah,
That
he was. He's a little stinker though. He's like, ow, like a delayed reaction. I'm like, you're being a psycho, but he's funny and he loves watching that video now. Okay, girlfriend. So what are your top three podcasts that you listen to other than your longevity blueprint?
I am that person who always has like 10 podcasts open and 10 books open. I mean, I'm that person. But so
Mhm.
I will say I like a lot of my guests on my podcasts. So I've been
Yeah.
listening a lot to Nathalie Needham's Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast. There's a lot of good
Okay.
information there. Um, I I've always loved Brian Buffini. I know he's more of a real estate podcast, but he changed from the Brian Buffini show. I think it's called the Good Life podcast. Entree Leadership. I love that podcast because obviously
Hmm.
I'm an entrepreneur like you. And then I do listen to the McCullough Report, a lot of Peter McCullough stuff. Huberman Lab is like near daily. His
Yeah,
podcasts are so long too. I'm like, how does he do this? His podcast.
I
I mean, we're going
know.
long today, but normally my podcasts aren't this long. And yeah, he just has so much beneficial information. Sometimes Peter Attia, I think it's The Drive, I'll listen to. And then from a motherhood standpoint, I really like Risen Motherhood and then the Mama Bear podcast, which you introduced me to, from the book.
Yeah,
So those
yeah.
are, I'm always listening to a lot of
That
stuff.
mama bear is just so timely with everything going on in the world. I really liked that as well. What are you currently reading?
Again, like 10 books. In fact, I can't even remember them. As I got in my car this morning, I'm like, oh, well, there's one of the books I'm reading. It's called Clockwork. It's Mike Michaelovitz. I can never say his name, but kind of trying to get your business to operate without you in essence, right? Which my business
Yeah.
cannot at this point, but reading that. And then on spring break, I like a lot of Christian authors. So Lisa Turkhurst, one of her books
Hmm.
is It's Not Supposed to Be That This Way. Because there are just
Hmm.
some things in my life that aren't going exactly as I would like them to go right now, right? And so
It's not your plan. Are you kidding me?
it's God's plan.
God's
She's
plan. Darn it.
What really stood out to me in that book, though, she said, a lot of Christians say, oh, well, God never gives you more than you can handle. And she's like, that's a lie. That's not in the Bible. That's not how life
Yeah.
goes. And I was like, man, yeah. So she says God doesn't want us to handle our problems. She wants us to hand our problems over to him. And I just thought that's so good. And so, yeah, when it rains, it pours. Sometimes life isn't going like I said is planned, but maybe God's leading us in a different direction. He's closing one door to open another that we can't see because
Mhm.
we're this little peon, right? He's seeing the larger, bigger picture.
Yeah.
But she talks a lot about him using dust to create something new, better than we had imagined, and just trusting God with our situations and circumstances, and not being mad at God that He's withholding something from us.
Hmm.
But she says several times in the book, she says he loves us too much to answer our prayers any other way than the right way, and the right way is his way, not our way. So that's a good book. She has a lot of good books. And then I'm also reading Hannah's Hope, which is another Christian book, just seeking God's heart in the midst of miscarriage and infertility and adoption loss. And that's a really
Yeah.
good book. And honestly, I'm working to read the Bible more. Sometimes it's hard because I
Yeah.
like stories. The Bible does have stories, but working on that too.
Love it. I love it. Well, kind of speaking of things that you're working on, you've got books, podcasts, all of that, but what's on your radar for the next few years?
Oh gosh. Okay. So it's hard to say this out loud because then you're like, well, what if it doesn't happen? But who cares if it doesn't happen? Here's where I'm
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
this point.
Amen.
So I wanted to get the second edition of the Your Longevity Blueprint book out by the 5-year anniversary of the book, which is last December. That didn't happen, but that's going to happen soon. So I'm going to get that done.
That's been 5 years already.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
did that happen?
5.5. I know.
Yeah. I feel
And
like you
then
just published it.
And then I am working on a second book on natural hormone replacement therapy because that's really my niche. So that's going to be my next book. I do want to work on, I'm working on a PMS perimenopause mastery course, and I really want to host a summit. So in the next 5 years, I want to host a summit, and then I want to get ILAD certified, which is International Lyme Associated Disease Society certification, and do Dr. Bredenson's certification, the recode, like to prevent Alzheimer's. I want to work on that. But from a practice standpoint, I want to get another full-time nurse practitioner, and I want to take
Yeah.
Fridays off, quite frankly. I just want to have
Yeah.
time to go get a massage and like take my son to the park and just have more time off. So that's
Yeah.
that's what I'm doing. But I am going to take a break this summer, even from the podcast for listeners, which I will announce that I just need some downtime. We pushed hard for 3 years with this podcast, so we're going to take a break. But yeah, I guess when I think of like, where am I going to be in 4 to 5 years, I might kind of be in the same place ultimately, not a lot different. But I think what also is driving me, and this is partly from what Peter Attia says on his podcast, but with his patients, he more or less says, how long do you want to live, and how are we going to get you there? So don't get me wrong, I've always had 3 to 5 year goals, and so have you, and we need to have those. We need to have quarterly goals, we need to have daily goals, right?
Yeah,
but now more what's driving me is, where do I want to be when I'm 85? Like, where do I want to be when I'm retired? Where do I want my health to be? So what do I need to be doing in those 3 to 5 years, in those, with those daily habits, to get me to where I want my health to be when I am retired and when I'm at 85, right? I had William later in life. I want to be alive to see grandchildren, right? I mean,
and enjoy,
so,
and truly enjoy
quality of life. Yep. And I want my patients to be thinking about that too, because, that's just going to make, if we can age with better health, that's going to make all of those experiences even more richer. And so while, yes, I want to think about the next 3 to 5 years, I also want to think about, where do I want to be when I'm 85? And I really think that's why I wrote part of the Your Longevity Blueprint book, is like, hey, we should be following all these steps. And some of my patients follow a lot of them, but rarely do my patients follow that whole longevity blueprint, right? There are a lot of steps in that. And I think if we can implement more of that, then we should be where we do want to be when we're 85.
Love it. Well, and I think too, so much like, and this is because of you, I'll never forget when you were saying, hey, you got to come to this anti-aging conference with me. And when I first heard that, I'm like, anti-aging, that is so aesthetic. I'm a chiropractor. I don't deal with aesthetics, but really anti-aging is so much more about aging gracefully with dignity and pure enjoyment of high quality. And so I appreciate that information that you not only shared with me, but just how you're multiplying it from writing books to podcasts. But also what I appreciate you is that you're just humbly walking the talk of what you like, everything that you preach, that you publish, that you put out there. You don't just put it out there and then not live it in your own life, which has been great to witness and stuff. But you also acknowledge areas that need improvement, that you're working hard to slow down, you're working hard, that you're putting too much on your plate. So you acknowledge them, but how it's not just an easy to snap the finger just to make that happen. But also that like you give all the glory to God. So that's again amazing to witness, and thank you again for sharing. So what is one of the last questions here, your top longevity tip?
It's so tough because, I've heard, 150 probably people give me their top longevity tip. And my instinct is to say sleep, because again, I need to sleep. Sleep's my baby. I have to get good sleep. But I think what I want to tell the audience is that they have permission to take care of themselves. And I'm preaching to myself here too, but I see so many women who take care of their husbands, their parents, their children. They've sacrificed their health. And I've even done this to a certain extent. And so I think my top longevity tip is simply just to take care of yourself. Be careful with what you read, what you watch, what you're putting in your mind, and what food, what water, what air, right? Everything, your thoughts, everything that you're putting in your body, because you've only been given one, but you have permission to put it first.
I love it. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for letting me interview you, for allowing me to help put you on display and the wonderfulness of what you bring to this world. But seeing your inner workings, your thoughts, I appreciate this. I know your followers probably appreciate this as well, and your patients. So thank you for joining today and letting us flip the script.
Yeah, this is fun. Thank you for just the idea of doing this. At first I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. But you had great questions, and I want to say thank you for introducing yourself to me. It was over 10 years ago at Elmcrest Country Club. I was speaking with Joe Collins, and you came right up, and I think you just knew we have to be friends. Like, I think you just knew we're on the same wavelength here. Let's meet, because we're, there aren't many people like
I'm going to be in your life for the rest of your life. Like, this is just going to be a thing.
But thank you for writing the foreword to my book, and for helping with the book launch and today's podcast, and for your continuous referrals and collaboration. I think some of my best friends are female entrepreneurs because they have felt the pain and the successes, and I can just call you up and ask you any question on anything, and you're pretty much an open book, willing to listen and help. And so again, thank you for your referrals and for being our cheerleader. I know a saying in my mastermind is that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so thank you for lifting us up and being an excellent resource in the community. I already mentioned this in the interview, but when I first started this practice, I really felt like I was one of the only people in the state, not to toot my horn, but I was. And I'm not saying that again to toot my horn, to say that I felt scared, like that I was on an island, but I felt that this was on, I was supposed to be on, right? I knew I was, but anyways, but meeting you was great, because then I had this buddy that was like going to come on this island with me. So
I'm going to come vacate with you on your island.
So that was great. And now there are many more similar functional medicine practices in town. And like you said, we don't see them as competition. We see this as, yay, finally, like we're bringing this to the masses. People are wanting, I think never else in time has so many people needed functional medicine. And so yay for there being more clinics, and for me not being the weirdo anymore. We're all about them. And I'm just super excited that we get to be on the cusp of such exciting progressive root cause medicine. And I also want to say just thank you. I guess I get a moment to thank all my listeners here and our patients for sending us word of mouth referrals, and for reading the book, and for listening to our podcast. I mean, I have patients who I've seen for over 10 years, and that's incredible, their loyalty, and they're just sending us their friends. And so I'm speaking to all you guys, ladies and men, but you guys deserve all the credit for seeking out this type of care, even 10 years ago. And I wouldn't be able to do this or have this practice without all of you guys. And so you've shaped the way I do things. You've sent me, podcast guests, and different labs and ideas have helped me network. And so but our clinic, I should say, we as a clinic have grown tremendously because of how you, CJ, and our audience, our patient, have helped us. So I want you all to know that I take this opportunity to have this clinic as a blessing, and I very seriously as a privilege and a responsibility. So I just want to wrap this up saying, again, thank you, CJ, and thank you to all of our patients for really entrusting us, our team, with your care.